cashew sustainability webinars. I'm delighted to share with you briefly the overview of sustainability challenges in the cashew sector. And go to starting with the overview. And basically, I would like to share that this, as you see on the screen, is a summary of how the cashew sector looks like. We have inputs such as planting materials, which are then used by farmers to grow the cashew. Once the cashews grow, we have aggregators that are collecting the nuts, either for domestic processing or for export before they are processed. And then once we have the white kernel, so we are moving from the area where we're talking about raw cashew nuts, and once they are processed, we have what is called cashew kernels. And then the kernels are then going through further processing, then exported, then further processed, such as roasting it, salting it, spicing it up, as you may wish, to get this crunchy, delicious cashew that we all love. Once we get this is going to the retail and then to the final consumers, who are so happy always to have cashews because they are delicious, they are nutritious, and they are healthy and serve as very, very convenient snack all over the world. So this is how, in simplified form, the cashew sector looks like. Now, if we go to the next slide, we will see that the sector appears really straightforward, as I have shared on the previous slide. However, would like to inform you that the cashews currently, we have about 5 million tons of cashews produced worldwide by smallholder farmers. So I was trying to check how many smallholder farmers are involved, and I did not get a exact figure, but I know there are over 2 million farmer households that produce cashews worldwide. And once they are produced, they are allowed most of the time to drop, and they are picked and aggregated by different people. And here on this slide already, you see we have local traders and buyers, we have buying agent, district traders or collectors, assemblers, or different names, as you may see. In the African French countries, you have pisteurs at this time, aggregating the cashew, the raw cashew nut. Then in most cases, as currently you are aware that about almost 60% of the world's cashew are produced in Africa, about 35% in Asia, and 5% in Latin America. The reality is that most of the cashews, 85%, are then exported in the raw cashew nut form. And this is exported by international traders, by brokers, RCN brokers. Then the product goes to a processor. This is the case for probably 60% of the world's raw cashew nuts. In this case, I'm talking about Vietnam, that is processing its own domestic production, about 400,000 metric tons. India is processing its own domestic production. Africa strictly transforms or processes only the domestic raw cashew nuts. For Vietnam and India, who are the two major processors worldwide, processing about 85% of the world's cashews, they have these two value chains. So they are processing their own domestic nut and also importing for India more than 100% of their own production. And for Vietnam, they are importing more than 5 times their own production because they have high opportunities to process, but the production is low. Now, moving from there, then the processed kernels at this stage now enter the kernel export market. And here again, you see there are many buyers. We have the kernel brokers, we have importers, and then most of the time the cashew is further processed After it's been exported, it is further processed by the roaster, manufacturer, or food ingredients users. Today, use of vegan food is very popular, and therefore cashews are also used highly as food ingredients. Before the product is finally reaching the consumer through the retailer and food services, mainly in North America and in Europe. Now, if you look at this chain, you realize that from the domestic processor, in this case, I'll use Africa as an example. If cashew or when the cashews, raw cashew nuts are processed, then it now goes into the export market. You will realize that here we have some problems. The first is that the chain is very long, it is fragmented, and you can see how many actors are involved. This obviously poses challenge in terms of being able to have a transparent value chain because the product goes through many hands, many intermediaries before it reaches the final consumer. Therefore, the question of traceability becomes key. How are we able to really tackle the question of traceability? I'm buying some cashews and then I realize that I'm checking where is this cashew coming from, and you see this product maybe come from Mozambique or Vietnam or India or Indonesia or probably Benin. Please. So this is the issue for cashew, that it is very complex chain. Therefore, it's difficult to really have traceability, and that limits the extent to which the sector is currently able to track the product from farm to fork. So we will look at generally what the issues are. And the first issue we want to look at, that the sector is highly trader driven. And when we talk about trader, we're not only talking about the fact that it goes through many actors, many intermediaries, and it is actually bought and sold. But we're also looking at the fact that there could be a time where even the farmer may have a trader perspective because they decide, I want to export this directly. And there are some cooperatives that are doing this, selling directly to international traders. There could also be, and we have observed that there are also some times where even a processor may have the trader mentality or the trader's perspective, because there are, based on the market situation, based on the market dynamics, may decide this is a time to export the raw cashew nut rather than processing. So that really poses challenges for the sector. And I spoke about the limited transparency, which actually affects the ability to have traceability in the sector. We have observed from the previous slide the many actors, the many intermediaries, making the chain very long and fragmented. The cashew value chain is a very, especially the raw cashew nut also, is a very important export chain, or a very important crop. And this, for that purpose, government would like, especially now we see more and more involvement of government. And we notice, or we have observed, that government would like to facilitate the process and also protect the various markets. This poses challenges. And the first challenge is that the market is very volatile. It is difficult for businesses to really plan systematically because it becomes very unpredictable what could be happening next. I spoke about traceability, and you saw the long, complex, fragmented chain. That poses problem for traceability. And if we look at the current EU regulations on the EUDR, where we need to trace our products from farm to fork, we need to start thinking as a sector how we want to address the situation of traceability. In terms of profitability for producers and farmers, the key issues are that The cashew sector currently is $1 billion euro market. However, the distribution of the profit is not balanced. It's not equal if we look at the entire supply chain from the farmer side to the local processing. That means processing from the raw cashew nut to the kernel to the roasting and then the retailing. The profit margins are not even, and that poses challenge for the sector. On the next slide, I would like to just share briefly on the current production systems that we have. So here you can see that cashews are produced in Latin America, that is to your left on the screen, in Africa, and then in Asia. And the deep green is actually showing us the major producing countries from Côte d'Ivoire, which is in Africa, currently the main producing country with over 1.2 million tons, which is representing almost 25% of the world's cashew production, to Cambodia, Vietnam, Tanzania, Nigeria, and other countries that are currently the main producers. So if you look closer, okay, my arrows didn't come, but I would have loved to show you back to this map how the cashews are transported. I think in the next slide, I'll be able to show you how the cashews are then transported from Africa, mainly because Africa is producing about 60% of the world's cashews. However, processing as at 2023, 14% of the crop. So, or currently having 40% of the market share. So that means a lot of the cashews produced have to be exported. It poses other challenges that I will share shortly. So in terms of production, the cashews are produced mostly by smallholder farmers. The labor that is used is not really labor intensive. We cannot say cashew production is labor intensive. However, it remains manual from the time of planting to any farming activities such as even pruning. These are these are still manual activities and involves the whole household. And therefore, farming households have to do a lot of labor manually. We have observed over the years price fluctuations, and sometimes we are asking why is the good agricultural practices, the best practices in the sector not adopted by farmers. However, our observation is that most farmers do know what it means to really take care of their farms. However, when prices go down, for example, the attention they pay to the farms reduces. For example, they may not go to pick the nuts. We're looking always at how much is Ivory Coast or Côte d'Ivoire producing this year, how much is Ghana producing this year. In reality, when the farmers feel that the prices are good, they go ahead and collect most of the nuts. And where the prices drop, they collect less. And therefore, they have more cashews left on the farm. So each time we talk about the production of a particular country, let us also be aware that it is about how much the farmers actually are investing in collecting the nut from the farm. If everything is collected, and I know some really, really good practices with some processors in Africa that are working closely with the farmers, closely with the farmers to the extent that they're helping them to say, this is how you collect the nuts, and helping so that no nut is lost. If we get to this extent, you can really see that the amount of cashews available go up. But wherever prices become a challenge, then adoption of good agricultural practices go down. We also observed aging orchards in many countries, I think mainly African countries. And so that is a challenge because it means that we need the sector, when I say we, I mean the sector, need to think about how those orchards will be re-innovated and to ensure that we don't have issue of too little supply compared with the demand, because the demand is growing annually, about 4% annually. And farmers, unfortunately, do not have enough resources to renovate their farms, to build it up, to change old orchard for new ones. Farmers usually will sell their products, I mean the raw cashew nut, through the cooperatives. That is those farmers that belong to cooperatives, or they sell to traders. And the reality, again, is that most farmers do not belong to any cooperative, so they are selling individually. That really reduces their bargaining power. The sector currently is very, very informal and is slowly becoming formal. So if we look at the challenges that the current production structure poses, number one is on living income. I mentioned shortly that the farmers have difficulty with, or they have difficulty with bargaining position. They do not have bargaining position, mainly for several reasons. Number one, the prices are determined by global commodity markets, global commodity trading. And the farmers don't have a voice in how much the raw cashew nut costs. Secondly, they work as small-scale farmers, as individuals. They don't have bargaining power. And therefore, based on the power dynamics and the concentration of power in some sectors compared with the level of farmers, having living income for farmers becomes a challenge. Farmers, in this case, I'm not talking about living income only from the production of cashew, but they have farming systems, because most farmers also produce food crops for their families. And the challenge is that getting adequate income to reach the living income level is a social challenge. I have also explained earlier that cashews are produced by smallholder farmers, and therefore household members are involved in the sector, in the whole production system. So the potential of child labor, currently there's no evidence of child labor in the cashew sector. However, we need to pay special attention and to ensure that child labor is not occurring. When we look at environmental challenges, the first topic is about deforestation, and the EUDR, as we have, was introduced, has shown that we need to pay attention to deforestation. Cashew production is expanding in many countries. If we look at already 2006, Africa's production of cashews was at 34%. Africa had 34% of the global share of the production. Today, if we look at 2023, this share has increased to 58%. Cambodia was not on the cashew production calendar. Today, Cambodia is the number 2 producer of cashews. So we are expanding the area under cultivation. We are growing more cashews. There is very little research work to really increase the yields, which will give us the same results. So we have less space, less area under cultivation, but with really good planting materials, we'll be able to have the same quantities that we need. But currently, the budget available for research work is very limited. Therefore, yields, especially in Africa, are low. So all that I'm explaining do not apply to every country. I think this is something I should, it's a disclaimer that some of the information relates to some countries more than others. And so again, coming back to deforestation, if we are increasing the area under cultivation, we also need to pay attention to deforestation. And there is more clearing of land to grow more cashews, which result in loss of biodiversity, and therefore the climate is no longer good enough for the whole for the biodiversity, for the fauna and the flora, for the animals and for the plant in our biosystem. It is important for us to pay attention to this. And in addition, I also want to share that in the past years, climate change has increased. And we have observed El Nino effect and other effects, which are actually affecting the total production, total yield of cashew in several countries. I remember having discussions with colleagues in Cambodia, and they said, yes, this year there's El Nino. We think the production may go down. Same for Africa, same for West Africa. So the trend towards climate change and its impacts continue to increase, and that poses environmental challenge. And therefore, these are issues we need to pay attention to. Currently, unfortunately, we don't have enough data to really see if and to what extent there's deforestation and to what extent there's loss of biodiversity. So we need to also, as a sector, keep thinking about what does it mean for us. We need more data to really look at the environmental impacts of the total supply chain and how that affects the total ecosystem. When we look at the economic challenges, we look at vulnerability towards price volatility. I have explained this to a large extent. There is vulnerability because every year, and even within the same year, within the same season, you will observe prices go up and down throughout the season. And therefore, that makes it really difficult for businesses to plan. On the other hand, for farmers, they have difficult bargaining position because of the different power dimensions and the power concentrations. Potential yields, especially in Africa, are not reached. Currently, the yields in Africa, we continue to work on them. And it is observed that yields are growing, but not in every country. Some countries are more advanced than others. And we can also see that if we look at the statistics for the volume produced by different countries over the past 10 years, you can see where there is really fast growth and where there is very slow growth. And these are all linked to the research and the ability to really disseminate information to farmers. That makes it difficult. For Asia, Vietnam, and India, the yields are better. We have information about yields of about 1,500 kilos per hectare, which is good. In Africa, these are less, and there's still a lot to do. And you can see that all these challenges are interlinked. For example, if we talk about yield, if we do have higher yields, the challenge of deforestation hopefully will be any potential risk of deforestation can then be reduced because we have higher yield per hectare. And so the farmers can grow the same or smaller land surface and get the same quantity of cashews that are needed. So this challenges that are cited here are not isolated. They are all interconnected. And this is why we have these green arrows showing the interconnectivity between the different potential challenges that the sector is or could face. Now, let's talk a bit about the processing area. So first thing is that every country that is producing cashew also do have some level of processing. So in this graph, we are showing the producing countries as well as major processing countries. And the countries in deep green are producing more than the rest. And they also are the ones processing more. So we could have currently the number one processor globally is Vietnam. As I said, Vietnam is producing about 400,000 metric tons of the raw cashew nut, and at the same time importing annually about 5 times their own volume produced. So you can see the amount of cashews processed by Vietnam annually, exporting over 400,000 or about 400,000 metric tons of kernels annually to the US, to Europe, and to other countries. India is number two processor. India produces about 750,000 average metric tons of cashews annually and is importing the same quantity or more annually to process in India. However, India is the country that is it is also consuming what they produce, and I'll come to that when we come to the market. So India is the number two processor, and then we have Côte d'Ivoire, the emerging country that has worked extensively. The government of Côte d'Ivoire has put in place infrastructure for processing and actually boosting the processing. And you can see, we have seen with the data that is available, that in the past 7 years, the processing in Côte d'Ivoire has really increased from about 40,000 metric tons to currently over 250,000 metric tons. And it is growing, and we are very optimistic this will continue to grow. From Côte d'Ivoire as number three, we have Brazil, which used to be a main producing and processing country, currently processing at about number four globally. Then we have Nigeria as number five processor. Then Tanzania, Benin, Burkina Faso, Ghana, other countries follow. So what this actually means is that currently we have at least 60% of the global cashew that is not processed in the country where it is produced. So there's a lot of products to export. And in this case, we're talking about raw cashew nut traveling across several oceans, traveling across several countries to get to the main processing countries, mainly Vietnam and India. And that poses other challenges I'll speak about briefly. But what we should pay attention to is, what does it mean for us if we are not processing the cashews in the country where they are produced? It's a big challenge because it affects the carbon dioxide emission greenhouse gases that are produced. If we have to carry, let me put it this way, or travel with the cashews all the way to Vietnam to process and bringing it back, when we get to the other slide on market, you will see that this same cashew is traveling back. And every cashew that is processed, let's say in Vietnam, is actually passing through 2 oceans, passing through 13, at least average of 13 tracks. The cashew have to go in and be repacked and retransported. So all this poses a lot of environmental problem for the sector. Now, let's have a look at this slide where we have highlighted a bit the issues. So on this slide, we see that the cashews that are produced with their value addition. And as has been explained, mostly the value addition is taking place in Asia for the nuts and for the shell. About 85% of the world's cashews are processed in Asia. And that comes also with the processing of the cashew shell. The cashew shell is processed into many beneficial products, CNSL, or the cashew nut shell liquid, for electricity generation, for plain fuel, for dye, for tea, for other things that are used, the shells are used for, mainly for energy generation. Brazil is known for processing the cashew apple. So let me explain that when we say we're producing, let's say, 1 million tons of raw cashew nuts, it also means that we are producing 1 million times 8. So the cashew apple is about 8 to 10 times the volume of the nuts. So when we process the nuts, which is 5 million, multiply that by 8, between 8 to 10. Let's go for the lower value. So we are also producing probably 40 million tons of cashew apples that are not used at all. And the country that pays most attention to the processing of the cashew apple is Brazil. Now, cashew apple can be used for many things. First of all, it can be consumed as normal fruits, just like we have apples or we have bananas, we have mangoes, oranges are consumed. And Brazil have advanced with the Embrapa that have developed many varieties that are important for the Brazilian market and are therefore consumed as fruits. There's also the cajuna or the cashew apple juice, because cashew apples have the most, when you take the juice, you take the apple, 80%. If you have good processing efficiency, you have 80%, which is liquid, which is used for juice. But it can also be used for jams, jellies, and some few processors in Africa also process the cashew apple. I can mention Burkina Faso, where the cashew apples are dried for the Swiss market by Ghana Afrique, for example. Côte d'Ivoire also currently is developing many products for the cashew apple, and other countries as well. So there is a huge potential for exploiting the use of cashew apples and to add value for its use. Cashew processing in general provides working opportunities, especially for women. It provides seasonal jobs for women, and at least 80% of those working in the processing sector are women. Now, we say seasonal jobs, that comes with challenges because there is no job guarantee in most of the cases. I would say we have really very good best practices, some very good models that are emerging, especially in Africa, where selected processing companies are giving all year round contracts to the processors, to the women, so that they can have full-time job and they are assured of job guarantee. However, this is not the case for majority of the processing workers. We have issues of subcontracting, where we have observed that some processing companies do not recruit the workers directly. However, they subcontract the contracting to another organization. In this case, it is difficult to see what is happening. The standard, the food safety standard, the quality standard, the occupational health and safety standards that are in the main organization. How do we ensure that the same are prevailing in the subcontracted organization, and therefore workers in these organizations are benefiting equally? If we look at Vietnam, there's a lot of outsourcing of parts of the processing, mostly the shelling or the peeling side, depending on the organization. And so what we have observed that There are major organizations or processing company. Company A is processing cashew, however, have outsourced part of the work to other organizations to do. And in that process, it is difficult to really assure that the standards are the same, or we just do not have overview of what happens in these outsourced, let me call them enterprises or outsourced facilities. It's difficult. So there is that in terms of transparency, in terms of traceability, there is a potential risk of losing transparency, losing food safety standard because of subcontracting or outsourcing. Now, if we look at the EU regulation, 𝗧𝗪𝗡𝗡𝗘𝗖𝗧, which is currently in place for some other commodities, cocoa, rubber, and others, not yet for cashew, then we need to, as a sector, start thinking of what does it mean for us? How do we prepare ourselves to ensure that we can really respect this regulation or when we actually start or the day cashew become part of the commodities that are supposed to really respect the 𝗧𝗪𝗡𝗧''. So this are some topics as a sector we need to start paying attention to. What does it mean for us? There is also disparity between the raw cashew nut and kernels. And the two chains are not usually moving together. If we are even looking at pricing, at the beginning of the season, let me take this year, you could see that we started off with raw cashew nut prices that are below the values for last year. And the kernel prices were also even far below. By May this year, due to different actions, interruptions that took place in the sector, we saw that kernel prices moved up. And for the first time in 14 years, we saw some parity between the raw cashew nut and kernel prices. But this is not always the case. And so this is also a big issue in terms of business planning, in terms of worker conditions, in terms of profitability or economic gains for those in the sector. Now, geographical differences, we also have geographical differences in Africa, India, and Vietnam, and I have cited some of them in terms of how the structure looks like currently. They are not totally the same. Vietnam, for example, is a big giant in processing. They have the technology, there's a big government support, and therefore processing keeps growing. If we look at India, it's similar. India have had huge support from the government. And at a point, there is subsidy given for importing raw cashew nuts. Africa is emerging. Cashew is becoming more and more important for us. And we can see the example of Côte d'Ivoire, where government has put in place different measures to really push processing up. And we can see the figures in terms of the quantities that are going. And as well as in terms of food safety. Every cashew processor in Africa currently is pushing to have the right food safety standards. And that is a good opportunity for the industry. The other thing I would like to mention about Africa is the single roof processing. So in Africa, I think almost all processors are single roof. So traceability is easier because we are also just not importing. Importing cross-border trade is very limited, and you can guarantee that cashews that are processed in a particular African country is coming from that country. So in terms of traceability, I believe that it's also easier for African processors to take advantage, because then we have the opportunity to have single roof processing at origin, and therefore traceability could be easier. So we have some geographical differences that each origin can really pay attention to their strengths and work on issues that need more attention. Now, let's have a quick look on the social challenges. So again, the issue of living income, are we meeting the regulations of the CSDDD? Triple D. Recently, I think earlier this year, we have CNV International that did a quick study in Cote d'Ivoire on the labor issues, a first in the sector to be documented. The key issues remain that workers in processing factories in most countries, I'm not talking only about Africa, I'm talking about all over the world, India, Vietnam, Africa, get seasonal jobs. And therefore, it's not always evident that they are receiving the living income to meet their daily needs, to meet their basic needs. Then we spoke about the contract and job security. It is difficult because of subcontracting or outsourcing. So the other end of the chain is not transparent. It's difficult to see what is happening there. Then it's also difficult to really guarantee that occupational health and safety in a main facility and outsourced facility are the same. The other issue we mentioned was the long travel time for the cashew, especially if we're looking at processing in Asia, in Vietnam, that is importing 5 times its own production. India importing at least the same quantity of cashews that they produce by themselves. So the question of greenhouse emission for environmental impact becomes an issue. So in Cashew, we did a study, I think around 2018-19, on the carbon dioxide emissions and what it means if, for example, we take Ghana and we produce the cashews in Ghana and process them in Ghana. How does that compare in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions compared with if we were sending this product to Asia to be processed, and we notice that there's already 30% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So it definitely says that if we process the cashews at origin, we will be reducing the negative environmental impact of long travel times for the cashews. And of course, we need to pay attention to what we call on this slide waste management, but we're actually talking about shell processing. Shell, the tester. Today, we don't know how that in Africa particularly, the tester is hardly used. In India, I know this is used for other things, animal feed. How do we ensure that processors in Africa also have more gain in terms of shell processing, in terms of the tester? What shall we use this for? So there's a lot more we need to do. And again, you can see that there's no guarantee for profitable margin because of the various issues raised. And cashew generally is a huge volume, low profit crop if we look at the primary processing. So guaranteeing the profitable margin remains an issue. And if we could look at all the factors that are on this slide in terms of social challenges, in terms of waste management, in terms of processing the shell and others, this will enhance the profitable margins for processors. And one of the other factors that is affecting the inability to guarantee profitable margin is also the high volatility of the markets. It is difficult and very unpredictable to plan. First, we have the decision on who decides when and at what price the raw cashew nut or kernel to be sold. And also the topic of actually making it very competitive, processing and making it competitive. That makes it difficult to really have profitable margins. The power dynamics and the concentration of powers, again, play a role in the processing sector, as we have seen also for the production. Now, let's have a look at the markets, what happens in the markets. And here we'll see again that most of the producing countries are also processing. However, I would like to add one dimension where we now have the markets in place. So today, India is the number one consumer of cashews. 37% of the world's cashews are consumed in India. So India is processing and also consuming, and therefore very little is actually entering the international export market. So the main countries that are exporting kernels are then Vietnam to the US, to Europe, to China, and other regions. And in Africa, the market share for African countries is also growing, currently at 14% of the global market. I think that is very positive, and because if we want to really ensure origin processing, this is the way that the sector should go. So beside India, we have the main consumers being North America, about 20%. Then we have Europe. And then we have China. China emerging market is growing, currently about 9%. Then we have Middle East as the main consuming countries. Now, we will also talk briefly about what that means for most of the sector. And as you can see already, we have most of the cashews coming from Africa, going to Asia for processing, and then coming back to Europe, North America. So you can see that we have long travel time, which affect carbon dioxide emission. We have also the fact that the cashews have to really travel long distances. So if we are looking at the different characteristics of the cashew market, first of all, there is a growing demand for cashews because currently the market is growing about 4% per annum. And we saw in the past few years for Europe and US, more cashews being consumed annually. So there's a rapid growth of the sector. We look at this year, for example, in the first half, Europe grew about more than 20%. They imported more than they have done in the previous years, and similar for the US. China is growing. However, if we want to look at what this means for sustainability, because that is the topic of our presentation, we are looking at the Cashew Sustainability Series. And this is the first in the series. This is the first only regarding the overview, general overview. And in the future presentations, we'll deep dive into the various issues individually. Now, if we look at Europe, Europe has stricter sustainability standards. We now have the new EU regulations that are demanding social and environmental challenges to be addressed. The EUDR and the CSDDD currently are affecting other commodities like cocoa, not yet cashew. However, as a sector, we need to think through because this legislation should be reviewed. What does it mean? How do we prepare ourselves to meet the various legislation that are taking place? Because Europe is a major market. US demands makes higher demands for sustainability. However, they are not as strict as the EU. And there's not specific regulation beside the food safety regulations and having the PCQR or specific expertise for the companies that are processing cashew. The US is demanding food safety, Europe is demanding food safety, but beside that, there are stricter regulations, stricter standard for Europe. If we look at Africa, other regions, especially mention Africa as one example, the key issue is that there's very low consumption of cashews. We don't have, I think this is increasing. If I look back 10 years, this is definitely increasing. but we do not have data yet on how much is being consumed. If we look at the global map of how much cashews is consumed, Africa is not there, even though we are the major producers. So this is also an issue that we need to pay attention to, this low consumption and what it means for sustainability in general. China is emerging markets. It has grown currently to about 9% of the global market share, but there is really weak demand for sustainability. Same for the EU. Same for the UAE, United Arab Emirates, which is a major or emerging consumer, but very weak demand for sustainability. And of course, there are others. Now, in this webinar, we are discussing sustainability. So we also have to pay attention to, if the main consumer concerned with sustainability is Europe, what does it mean, first of all, for Europe? And what does it mean for us as a sector trying to work towards sustainability? Who is on board? Who is going to support us to really get to the level that we need? And the day that we have the EUDR covering cashew, what does it mean for us? If we do have so much cashews traveling across several oceans to be processed and then back to the market, what does it mean when we start really looking at sustainability for cashew? What do we need to do differently? And who will do it? How do we do it? Who is going to lead? And who will actually be there to support the smallholder farmers? As I have explained, they are household farmers, mostly working as individual farmers. Most of them are not in cooperatives. Who is going to support them? So these are some of the issues we need to start thinking about if Europe is the main origin looking at sustainability. Now, let's have a look at some takeaways, because I'm coming to the end of my presentation and I would like to share some takeaways that we should reflect on. First of all, sustainability is a transition. It's not a one way to go. It's a process. And now we have many actors. We have lack of traceability. How do we get there? It's a topic that we need to start paying attention to. How do we get there? How do we ensure that the many actors and many intermediaries in the chain are informed? And together we can actually increase the traceability of the sector. The market is very volatile. And because of this unpredictability, we have explained already the reasons for this unpredictability, the power dynamics, the concentration of power at one side, the fact that prices are decided on the global commodity trade, by the global commodity trade. There is therefore the risk of investment. How do we ensure investment, first of all, at the production side, and also at the processing side, to really ensure sustainability? We have looked at some of the issues. We have looked at traceability. We have looked at deforestation as some of examples. How do we do this? Then, of course, the last slide before this one spoke about the different market standards for sustainability. EU market is very engaged. EU is the driving force for change. What does it mean for EU? And what does it mean for the rest of the market? Because as a processor, I think what the EU need to pay attention to is that processors all over the world will decide as individual companies who they want to sell to. I'm just going one step back before I come back here, because I want to use this slide to explain this. All the processors globally will decide who they want to sell to. US is asking for higher sustainability, but they are not really straight. China has really weak sustainability, and Middle East even less. So who are those who are driving the sustainability? It's only EU at this stage. So what it means is that processors all over the world, based on what is easier for them, will decide who they want to sell to. And therefore, it appears that EU, with the stricter sustainability standard, need to pay attention to this and actually lead the transformation. EU need to lead the transformation. EU need to lead the discussion, and they have to be really committed to this, to meeting the standard for sustainability. Otherwise, the risk is that EU may be creating a difficult situation for itself, because the processors can choose to sell to somebody else. They can choose to sell to US, but not the EU. So EU, I'm inviting you that you need to lead. You need to be fully committed and support the whole transition from farm to fork. This is the picture that is currently obvious, and we need to pay attention to that. However, we have spoken about different challenges, what is happening in different countries. But I want to just take the opportunity to also assure every participant that there are really promising initiatives by early movers. We have seen early movers at the processing side. We have seen, I can give examples in Africa for best practices to really assure sustainability. And this is really promising. So the picture that we have shared in terms of challenges may look like a lot of work to be done. Yes, true, there's a lot of work to be done, but it is possible. And as industry, I'm moving from Asia to Latin America to Africa to other producing and processing countries, because we have seen really promising initiatives. We know it is possible to really meet this sustainability goal. So I invite everybody to join in meeting this standard, to reflect together in your small groups, in your countries, in your different sectors, in your companies. What does it mean for us? What shall we do differently? What are we doing, so that you can already identify what are we doing right and what do we still need to do? With this, I believe that as a sector, we can move forward. And in the subsequent upcoming webinars, we will be having a look at individual topics, and we'll invite experts to deal with this. We invite you to join the different webinars that are upcoming. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank you for your attention, and see you soon again in the next webinar. Thank you. Back to you, Herman. Thank you.